There we go. Talk about, I'm going to go on to the next slide for me. Wait a minute. So the concept of cognitive science and our understanding of how pupils learn has really gained ground in recent years. And I think, you know, Lawrence has declared that he's been teaching a little longer than when we were teacher training back in the 90s. It was a very different world. We've got much more evidence base around how children learn. And so it's important that we look at the science. And if you've done your initial teacher training recently, that ECT framework that came out in 2019 will help us understand and underpin some of those things. But again, you might not have done it. You might not have necessarily the language around it. You will be doing all the things. You just won't necessarily have the language. So it'll be important that we understand we're all at different places there. But the Education Endowment Foundation has really taken a hold of the science aspect of. So all the NPQ frameworks that we'll be looking at, just as an interest, has anybody done another one other than the ECT one? No? Okay. So all the NPQ frameworks have a teaching strand that talks about participants will be effective teachers who apply a range of knowledge and skills, including those set out in the early careers framework. And me go back to the early years framework to look at that. And we've all got different starting points. But it talks about, you know, that there's that there. But it's all right for us all to be in different places. So when we're looking at the outcomes for today, we'll be looking at recalling some of the concepts from cognitive science, collaborating and reflecting on your next steps. I don't know if anybody wants to, at this point, just have a chat about how they are getting on with the online portal. If anybody wants to start us off, or are you happy for me to go through us? So Nicole, do you want to, how are you doing with the online learning?
Yeah, I did my teacher training with Teach First, so it's the same platform.
Brilliant. And so has that felt familiar to you?
Yeah, it was my same login and everything.
That's it. Brilliant. Okay, so you're going to be our expert there because you've already got experience of that. What about you, Perry?
Yeah, so I'm quite new to it. So I have been having a little look. Because other colleagues have used something different. It's the first time that we've got the Teach First. So in previous ones, everyone's modules have come up as they've been doing them, whereas it seems that all of ours are up in one place, which is, I found a little bit confusing because I don't really know where I should be up to, you know, in regards of how much I should have done and how much.
Yes, I do, yeah.
And then the obviously the dashboard, I looked in the seminar reflection. I was wondering if that's to sort of have to be done after the face-to-face seminars rather than each webinar.
Can find out about that.
Okay, thank you.
So post-seminar reflection.
Yeah, so it's whether it's done after the seminars or if it's
it's after today's seminar, Perry.
At
any point, at any point. So hopefully that I sent an infographic with all the introductory materials, and that should detail that's the last thing that you would do before you go embark onto module 2, which obviously module 2's next seminar is later on. No, your 5th of December, isn't it? I think your next one is.
Yeah, our next one.
Yeah. So module 2 will be.
I think Stacey, what I'm saying in terms of little and often, it shouldn't be overwhelming. I agree with you, Perry, in the fact that the other one, it didn't release till you had more of an understanding. But for people, that was too difficult because they'd got free time, they'd got time to do it, but they couldn't do it. Remember the length of the programme and work at it a chunk at a time. It's very much eating an elephant, a little bit at a time, and working through. And if you're not sure, ask. you know, that's what we're here for. I do like the fact that we meet more regularly. We meet for shorter periods of time, but more regularly, so we can keep on top of those questions.
Thank you.
There. Lucy, how have you got on with your online?
So it's very new to me. So I've managed to obviously log on. I did all the introductions. I'm working my way through the unit 1, as I missed the introductory seminar, so I've only just physically watched that, so I'm on catch up a little bit. But it seems simple enough to go through and go through. So I think it'll be enjoyable to carry on with that.
Okay, and Lawrence?
Sorry, I'm showing my age now. It seems straightforward enough to go on there. I must say there's some terms that are different to what I would have used when I was going through and when I was training. But as soon as you read further into it, you think, oh, that's what that is. And
yes,
yeah, I do that anyway.
And,
do you know what I mean?
You know,
so it's just different terminology for stuff that you do all the time.
Nicole, the terminology that's used for ECTs is the terminology. You're absolutely right, Lawrence. You will know it. You'll just have to go, okay, that's the word being used. Then I can understand that. Terminology is really important. We're clear about that, and we'll work through that. And Casper, have you managed to get on?
Yeah, I've just gone and recapped it. Obviously, I went into my ECT module because I did the same platform, so I've redone it as well in the actual NPQ section now. But yeah, I managed to get through it.
Okay, that's lovely. Okay, so we're going to move on to an activity now, and we're going to go into groups in a minute. But the activity is, which module from the early career framework did you complete and why? And what knowledge and skills have you developed, and how has that impacted on your teaching practice? So we just need to sort of recap on that aspect of the online work. And if you haven't completed any of that yet, please don't worry, that's there. We can pick that up. So I'm going to ask Stacey if she can put us into 2 groups, and we've got about 8 minutes with this. Hopefully you've got some notes to hand, as it was part of that first formative assessment task. If not, please don't worry, we'll come back and talk about it. You've already introduced yourselves, so you should be able to crack on with that. So Stacey, can you put people in groups for me? There you go.
I should have opened it now. Should be 2 groups.
Thank you. Everybody's back. Yeah, I can see 5 of you. I don't know, I should have asked really, I suppose, Kiara, in terms of spokesperson from each room. We've only got 2 rooms, but would somebody like to share what you were talking about?
Not intentionally, but I put boys in room 1 and girls in room 2.
Okay. So Lawrence or Casper, boys, which one? Who wants to go first? Just put his hand up.
Yeah, I can go through it.
Thank you.
So Lawrence chose metacognition, and I chose how can we support all pupils to succeed. But we kind of went with the same kind of rationale. So both kind of contexts of our schools are disadvantaged, high SEN ratios, and then pupil premium for me as well. So I think for me, it was mainly just looking at making sure that I'm adapting to suit the needs of all the learners in the room. So Lawrence, I think you said that for you, it was the retention is the problem. So you're teaching and then you're reteaching, and it's just kind of going over that as a kind of hurdle. Whereas I think in my classroom, it's more a case of ensuring that everyone has the scaffolds needed to succeed, and it's an academy focus. So that's kind of the summary for us.
And I was, again, Casper, thank you for that, because I think it is interesting that the makeup of your school, but also I think it is really interesting to look at what the academies are looking at. And I think a lot of academies are looking at that retention aspect, because and local authorities, because it keeps coming up on Ofsteds as well. You know, the children are not able to recall what they once did and build on that learning from before. So that's a really interesting one. Perry or Nicole, I think Lucy's picked out for the moment, but Perry or Nicole, oh, she's back. Perry or Nicole, do you want to share anything?
We were just kind of getting really into the meaty stuff, and then the 8 minutes were up. But I looked at cognitive learning, or how do pupils learn, and looked at effective classroom. So we were we talked briefly about that.
Yeah. Okay. That's lovely. And as I say, I know, you know, for Lawrence and myself, we haven't, you know, those of us who've been teaching longer, that early careers framework is new and the language is new. And I always talk to the ECTs in the schools I work in, as you're my experts, you're much more current than I am, and therefore much more able to use the language around that. So thank you for dipping into that, and thank you for making sure those modules and that aspect of the online learning is completed. If you haven't completed it all, remember you can dip back into it. And remember that we're looking at all aspects being completed, because we've got that 90% to at the other end of the year complete. Okay, and obviously for me, you know, we don't want to be in a position, lost my mouse now, I need to find it. We don't want to be in a position where we're having to get back to things. So, interesting question there. Are cognitive, click too far, I've lost all your photos for a minute. Are cognitive science strategies central to your approach? So in the chat bar, well, the answer, I've given you the answer, so I'm not going to ask you to do that. But the answer is that 85% of teachers talk about saying that now 85% say, explain that, excuse me, Endowment Foundation says that 85% of teachers say it is now. I wonder what you would say. So in the chat bar, do you want to just put yes or no into that for me? I'm just going to try and find you again because I've lost you for 1 minute. If you can put yes or no into that for me. And I'm just going to end that so I can find you again, because I've lost you. That's okay, thank you. I'm back with you. We've got lots of people there in the chat bar joining in. Yep, and that working memory. So you're right. Yeah, we've got that aspect there. That's lovely. And try to, as much as possible, what an honest answer, what an honest answer. I'm going to go back to my slides now because I can get back on there. And I can keep you there as well. Apologies about this. Can you see my slides?
Yeah, we can see them now. They're just not very big.
So I'm going to go back to my current slide. There we go. Thank you. Is that better?
Yes.
Perfect. Sorry about that. Apologies. So we've got a quote there. Just give you a minute to read that. And again, we're talking about cognitive science, and we're all acknowledging that's an aspect that we want to be using, and using as much as we can. Okay. Really interesting. As I say, Lawrence will back me up here. We didn't use the word cognitive science in the 90s or in the noughties. So it isn't the answer to everything, and it certainly will help. And the key is it'll help pupils to process and to retain information. Our classrooms are messy and complex, and there needs to be a balance there, and you will find out practical and pedagogical. I think, as I say, having somebody who trained in the 90s, it was the practical rather than the pedagogical that was used. And things don't always translate, and that's why I think it's really interesting when Casper was saying, as a trust, we're looking at this, and hopefully you'll get that opportunity for trust elements to come together, and somebody will say, well, this works in my school, what works in your school? Is that your experience, Casper?
Yeah, definitely. I'm pretty sure it's a trust-wide initiative anyway, but our CPD, like the whole school one, definitely focuses on cognitive science, etc. It's like you're saying, just providing training for potentially older staff as well that have not come across it before.
Yeah, and it is, as I say, and then I also think we've got to think about our paraprofessionals, our support staff, teaching and learning assistants, and what their understanding of that is. And I think you're right to think about age and stage of where we're at in terms of the cognitive science approach. You talked about metacognition, you talked about recall. Has anybody got an example where they think they've really used research to inform and they've had success with their teaching? If that makes sense. Paul, have you got any examples you can give?
I was trying to think. Part of the problem, I think, and why I try to sometimes, is we follow so many different schemes. We don't get a lot of freedom with our curriculum. So I find when I run into a problem with the learning, then that's when I start to bring in the research, and then that's when I try to adapt it and to my specific class. So like, sorry.
I think it's a really useful example to give, because the schools I work in, the trust I work for, we don't call them schemes, we call them resources. In terms of and actually somebody's carefully curated that music scheme, be it charanga, to make it sequential, to build on previous knowledge and learning. So I think both Santa and Lawrence probably can remember, we've used schemes, we've not used schemes, we've used schemes, we've not used schemes. But the schemes that are there now are much more research-based and much more pedagogical in their approach to. But you're absolutely right, Nicole. They are a scheme, and actually you have to adapt for your class and for your learners, don't you?
Yeah.
And maybe chunk it, you know, or maybe recap. There's lots of things you need to do. Perry, I don't know if there's anything you can give to add to that, or to move it on.
Yeah, quite similar really, with obviously the schemes, and I think we've kind of been focusing on sort of working memory, cognitive overload, with obviously all the stuff that needs to be crammed in, when actually you kind of think that, you know, there's a part that perhaps needs, you might, you know the children better than what the schemes do. So I suppose it's kind of you sort of taking those and adding your own bits on, but we are kind of focusing on just trying to remember that, you know, the different working memories and how other children, you know, how much knowledge another child might be able to you know, contain and things like that. So
yeah, lovely. And just to check, are you happy, because there's only 5 of you, are you happy with me asking? If you've got nothing to say, I've got nothing to say. It's just, you know, it's called cold calling, but in the sense of there's only 5 of us, it's hard to keep that moving on. So we'll make a move on to the next slide. So a little activity for us here. And if I can ask, I mean, there's only 5 of us. So if you pick one, if I can allocate them out. Perry, can you do long-term memory? Nicole, can you do retrieval? Casper, shared. Lawrence, learning style, and Lucy, dual coding. And we'll leave the other 2 because they'll come up. But if you can just have a couple of minutes to have a look at that. 10 words. Your time starts now. And you can use Google if you want. If you want to drop them in, oh, we've got somebody already using that chat bar. Well done. The Casper's put retrieval. Thank you. We've got 3 of them up. Have a look at what people are saying. See if you agree. One, two, three. Just waiting for a couple more to go in that chat bar. Any more to add? Thank you, Perry. We're all up there. Okay. So, working memory, where information that is being actively processed is held. I think we're all happy with that one. Long-term memory, a store of knowledge that is constantly updating and evolving. I think we got a good definition that was similar to that. When we're looking at spaced practice, distributed learning and retrieval opportunities over time, and I think that's one that we could. I don't think I use enough. I don't think we do it and then come back to it. So I think, you know, in the schools I work in, I think that's one that we need to look at. We've got retrieval practice, recalling information from long-term memory, flashcards, quizzing, mind mapping. I see flashcards a lot when I see phonics. Those of you who are in Key Stage 1, we see that a lot there, don't we? So there's lots of opportunities there. Okay. That's lovely. Thank you for joining in with that. Talks about, and as I say, we're going to go into groups again, and we'll mix up those groups if that's all right, Stacey. We're going to think about which of those are the most effective and which do you think are the least effective. It might be interesting to start with the least effective in terms of what in your school, your setting, but those are there. So Stacey, could we go into, please? And it's for 10 minutes. So Nicole, hopefully you'll have a bit longer to get underneath it. But if you pick one that a spokesperson as well for the end, and we're looking at which is the most effective, least effective, and why do you think that? We're all back, and hopefully we have a spokesperson from each group.
I don't mind doing it, Mel, for
Go on then, Lucy, off you go. What were you talking about?
So we were saying about the like rereading and checking notes and everything. Even Casper said that his side, because he's in secondary, doesn't quite always, the children don't recognise it or understand it. And I said, especially within our cohort of year 2, they're not quite at that mental age to physically understand it yet. So when they say, oh, well, I've not missed that capital letter, they're not there to be able to do it. So it's just working with them and trying to train them within that. But on the other side, dual coding is working better. So with us, we'll use lots of visuals, we'll have lots of widget symbols. You've always got the verbal there, and it's not just having the visuals on paper, it's adapting the lesson. So whether that visual is a bit of a movement that they can physically move within that. And then that's where Casper said that actually he doesn't do much movement within the English lesson. So it was, how could we create it in that respects for him? Because it doesn't just support that the bottom 20% that we have, it's supporting those higher achievers as well, and how you can push them in that respects.
Yeah. Anybody want to build on that or challenge anything there? I do think it's the concept of age and stage. Some of them, you know, are more appropriate at certain points, but anybody want to build on that or add to it? Do the other group want to to speak? What, remembering we were talking about what was the most effective and the least effective. So who was in the other group? I can see Nicole reaching for a computer.
Lawrence, Nicole, and Perry.
Thank you.
We also said rereading notes, making notes probably isn't the most effective way. We said retrieval has had some good impact, and Lawrence had a really interesting take on his school because obviously he's had a lot more experience with his teaching. So he was talking about how he tailors his learning to adapt to different styles of learning, which is very similar. And it's just making sure that things are visual for those that need it, and making sure that those are auditory for those that need it, or more hands-on for those that need it.
Yeah. Lawrence will remember vacuum class, vacuum, won't you?
I will do that a lot. As far as the physical movement that goes in classroom as well, we use something called Kagan strategies at the minute that really involves getting kids to get up and move around, especially when it comes to mixing special needs children with those working at age-related expectations.
Is that one of the things where we have a shoulder partner and a diagonal partner?
Yeah,
Lawrence, yeah.
the
You
card
want to
in
just
the middle.
expand a bit on that for us, because other people might not have heard about that.
The idea is to get everybody involved in a lesson at the same time, so that you're not just sitting there talking. They take an active role within learning. It's aimed at all ability levels, not just one particular one. The goal is for the older, well, the more able children to coach those less able ones by working together so that they can achieve class expectations, really, so they have a go at doing it. So if the more able coach the less able through an activity, there are lots of different styles of activities that you can do. It gives a sense of achievement. It also breaks up the day, so everybody's not sat down all the time. It works pretty much on those three: visual, auditory, and kinesthetic learning kind of things. So it tries to adapt and incorporate all three different learning styles into it. It doesn't work for every subject. I mean, it works where things go in there. We try to do it about 3 times a week. It's particularly successful in things like English, where you've got to have discussions, and maths. I find it really good, especially if you're trying to, retrieve information, facts as well, especially in times tables and things like that. But you just take what you can from it and use it. But we found it useful for a point. I wouldn't use it for everything, but I would
No,
use it for
that's
those that
lovely.
I can.
Yeah, and it's always good to hear other people's ideas. Website that colleagues can look at, because if there is, could you drop it in the chat?
I can have a look in my desk drawer, because I think I've got the book that we used to do it with.
That'd be lovely. Okay, thank you for that. So we've got here what research tells us. So it tells us the most effective, some show promise, and then the ineffective. I think we've kind of you've said similarly, and that concept of rereading when you're 5 is really tricky, isn't it? But certain strategies show promise of being effective, but further evidence is needed for that. But I think it's we know that retrieval practice has a positive impact on pupils' learning, and it's low cost. I think EEF is always talking about the cost of things. So that's, those two are perhaps ones that we need to look at. And as I say, I'm interested in and wanting to work on the space practice in terms of, do we go back enough to the things that we have learned and we have taught? Do we go back enough to ask them to recall it? I know that with some schemes advocate that because they go back, and I certainly think with anything that around a writing sequence, you can often have done something last term and you're asking them to then apply it. So I do think that it's interesting to look at that aspect. Okay, there's another quote for us there. So the knowing of principles and the effective teaching is only half the battle. That's how we effectively implement them, how we implement them in the classroom is what makes a difference to outcomes. So what works in one school may not work in another, and what works for one cohort of children may not work for another. And you know, established when we're talking about schemes that have their pedagogical research involved in that. If it's not working for you, like Nicole says, you've got to adapt and shift that movement on. Okay, 2 ways to lose the power of a good theory. Misunderstand an important part of the theory. Within the trust I work in, we talk about lethal mutations. We know a little bit and we go to this place and then fail to target the theory effectively. So we're using it, but ineffectively. And I think, Lawrence, you just explained that really well, that there are things that we can do but it's not always okay. And I think, Nicole, you gave the scheme is there, but I need to use it in a certain way. So it gives me a couple of examples here. So it says, Mr. Bell has heard a lot about dual coding and that learning can be enhanced by pictorial representations alongside information. So he fills all his classroom slides with quirky illustrations and makes this woman learning memorable. But unfortunately, the images end up distracting his pupils and increasing their cognitive load, meaning that they struggle to remember. And I'm sure you can think of examples of schemes that have done this, where I want to give you an example of a SAT paper, Key Stage 2 SATs, that they'll randomly put something on that has no relevance, and actually they think by putting a picture there it might help. I don't know if anyone else can think of an example where we think that it's helping, but it actually isn't helping. Just checking on the chat. And then the failing to target the theory effectively, the example it gives is Mrs. Rushby has heard all about worked examples with incorrect information in them, and has been shown to be an effective way of teaching information while managing cognitive load. When she uses the example in a Year 7 maths class, most pupils can't identify the errors, and many of them end up reinforcing the wrong answer. And so the pupils, therefore, are worse off by doing that because they think that that's the right thing. And again, I'm sure you can think of some examples yourselves. I don't know if anyone can think of anything that applies to those two things, maybe in your own teaching career or you've seen. Anybody being brave, thinking of something? Doesn't matter. Oh, Nicole's reaching for that. I can see your hand moving, Nicole.
Sorry, I put one in the chat. We had a problem with we had feedback from someone that said, oh, you need to make your children more engaged in the activities. So we went back and made all these really fun activities, like we did a color run for RE, but none of the kids could remember why they were even doing it, so they kind of missed the whole purpose of it. So we had to kind of go back again and alter our approach to, the activities themselves and why we were doing them.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody. I think that's a really it's almost a bit of both of them, isn't it? Because I'm thinking this, but it's taking me down that road. Anybody else got an example? I can think of one. The school I work at now. So we've got a really good at Ladywood personal development offer, and it's a really comprehensive, well planned out, well thought out. And the example I would give you, during our inspection over 12 months ago, our children couldn't remember the British values at all. They could tell you loads of things they'd done, but they couldn't tell you why they'd done it. They started with the why, they couldn't do the why. So it's made us much more explicit with our language across school about the why we're doing it, and limited it. So it's really interesting. And as I say, you see a lot of those things when we're working with our students from initial teacher training, but even doesn't matter where we are, we can have something and then go, why did we do that? And it's much easier when you're observing a lesson or not involved in the planning to see those things. So we're doing really well for time because we've got 5 minutes left, and we are we've had that conversation about the fails and implementing. I'm gonna not ask us to do that because I think we've done that in terms of in groups. But I wonder if you could look at question 4 there for me in terms of what advice would you give a new teacher wishing to make cognitive science central to their approach to teaching? I'm going to give you a couple of minutes and I'll come round. What advice would you give? If somebody wants to start, it'll make it easier to go round rather than going to session groups for that.
I would say to just keep it simple. I've seen it's, you know, you try to make all these elaborate lessons and you try to go above and beyond, but really you just have to really keep to simple. What's your outcome? What are you trying to get them to learn? And just make sure that you're not deviating too far from it, because otherwise they just get sidetracked and then you lose the whole purpose of the lesson.
Yeah, I think, and Nicole, I think that's so true. I work in primary, but of early years, keeping it simple is really, really, again, with the writing sequence, keeping it simple. So thank you for that. Anybody want to filter in to give us another piece of advice you'd give to a new teacher wanting to use cognitive science?
I would say if you're using a scheme, don't treat it as gospel. You take what you need out of that scheme and adapt it yourself to the way that you think it will be best presented. We use White Rose Maths. I miss an awful lot of questions out of that one because I think it complicates the thing that I'm trying to teach, okay, by presenting things in a different way that is alien to what I've just demonstrated. So pick and choose what you use is what I would say.
That's lovely. Keep it simple, pick and choose.
Yeah.
Lucy, you've turned your mic on, so you must be telling us a word of wisdom for a new teacher.
Going with Lawrence, it's just being that adaptable and making sure that everyone can understand the learning. So with obviously you've got your children that are the underachieving, your bottom 20%ers, making sure that they're able to achieve, but then also not all the time the schemes won't push those higher ability children, so it's really extending them and allowing them those deeper challenges as well. So it's just having those adaptations in place and being aware.
So we're keeping it simple, we're picking and choosing and we're adapting. Yeah. Anybody else? I'm sure you've got words of wisdom. Don't worry if you haven't. Oh, Casper's gone.
I'd just say the biggest thing for me is being consistency, and especially in terms of cognitive science principles like interleaving and spaced learning. So just making sure you've got those opportunities that you teach it, not necessarily the same way, because obviously you need to adapt it, but just making sure that the approach is familiar for the students so that they're not ever kind of confused with anything. It's not left field. It's kind of getting into the comfort. So I'm talking more specifically about specific writing frameworks. If they're doing independent practice, for example, you're not always going to give them something new. It's just kind of reinforcing what they're learning rather than always trying to evolve it.
Yeah, and it's true of secondary, particularly because when they're moving rooms and spaces, actually that consistency is really important, isn't it, in terms of teaching styles, to understand how we might be assessing, might be different in different subjects, but if there's a thread, that will really help. Okay, any more? Don't feel pressured. I don't want people to ever feel pressured that they've got to join in. So we're approaching the end where we're thinking about our key takeaways, and that's something for you to just jot down and have a look at. And as I say, we need to be careful about how we translate theory into practice, or we might hinder rather than help. Okay, so just make a note of what you think those key takeaways are for you, and that's a really good thing to put in your reflection. Any questions? Stacey's going to help me out here by putting the the feedback in the chat. It was a QR, but she's already done it by the looks of it. There you go. So if you can, just go into the chat and copy that NPQ feedback form. I'm going to try and end it in a moment. So if nobody's got any questions, are you sure nobody's got any questions? We've got our references there, and Stacey will send the slide deck out to you today once I've sent them to her. Anybody got anything they want to ask or check in? So keep an eye on your online. If you've not already done that, please do check back in. We're due to be back together on the 5th of December. So if you've got any questions before then, come back to us on that. Stacey, is there anything you want to add there?
No, just that obviously following this, as Mel said, working your way through module 1, module 2, obviously you've done the diagnostic activity before you begin module 2, you'll be in a good place. And as much as you can get through onto module 2 before the 5th of December. And then just completing the post-seminar reflection, again, for seminar 1, not obviously straight after this unless you want to stay on and complete it then, but obviously now that you've had this first seminar with Mel, then you can go on and do so.